Hi there, Speed at the bottom of the helix. Still in the running for the gold medal for the most clinics on NMRX. This should be his fifth one. Modeling the Twin Cities, we welcome back from Wisconsin, Mr. Dave Burman.
Well, good day. I'm going to go ahead and get my PowerPoint up here, so let me do that quick. By now, you'd think I would know how to do this perfectly.
Closed eyes.
There we go. And we're going to kind of kick that up. So normally when I'm talking about big industries and big stretches of track, lots of cars. Today, I'm going to take it down a little bit to the micro level. And we're going to talk about the Hiawatha Avenue Switching District. This is a little section of flour milling territory in the Twin Cities. Right now, the Minneapolis-St. Paul Light Rail, their transit authority, runs trackage on the other side of the street as Hiawatha Avenue. And this trackage is still active today, although it's starting to see a little bit less use. And we'll talk about that a little bit. This is the first video, this is the first presentation I've ever used video in, so I'm hoping the sound is going to work because there's some pretty interesting video of this line. And I'm hoping, there we go. So let's take a look at one of the Minnesota Commercial's engines. This is a C424 switching at one of the mills on the Hiawatha line. We'll talk about what that is in a second. So let's talk a little bit about the Mill District and Hiawatha Avenue. Basically, it's a complex of buildings along about a 5-block stretch of track. Initially, this was older Milwaukee track, and it was basically the secondary milling district. They wanted to build flour mills, but the downtown along the river in the St. Anthony district was pretty heavily milled. So this was a secondary place because it was close to the railroad, and flour mills, grain elevators like railroad. And this is a aerial picture from the Minneapolis Development Group, looking at some of the historical functions, some of the neat buildings that were in the territory. And the ones that we're going to kind of look at a little bit are going to be the Cargill, now Minnesota Seed, or Minneapolis Seed, the ADM Nokomis Mill, Elevator T, the ADM Atkinson Mill, which was initially the Atkinson Flour Mill, the Checkerboard Elevator, and then the Purina Feed Mill. So we've got a little bit to look at. This is a really nice stretch of railroad if you were looking to build something that was a little bit smaller, because there's a lot of things that are going on in here. As you could see, we had a scrap yard. We were working in one of the mills. All of these mills and all these elevators have rail service, and they have unique rail service. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Well, I have to give credit to a few people. The first thing, for the YouTube video, Douglas Hildebrand has been capturing the Minnesota Commercial and Twin Cities railroads all over the place. You probably saw his tag SD45 7500. If you look that up on YouTube, you'll find a lot of videos that he has in this territory and other places along the Minnesota Commercial. And I have to give Dave Voss from Minneapolis a little bit of a hit. He gave me a full set of the original Sanborn maps and the fire protection maps for this territory that the Milwaukee Road had. So I got a chance to look at the original trackage. And then a gentleman named Barry Carlberg. Barry Carlberg has worked for a number of short lines. He's a great resource. He's a railroad modeler, former rail, currently is living in Minnesota. And he produced a really interesting document for the Minnesota Commercial when he worked there on how to switch this particular line. And I just happened to come across a pile of these documents at a swap meet and kind of looked them over. I've since had a chance to talk a little bit with Barry. I want to spend a little bit more time digging in with him, but this is kind of a full map of at least down as far as the lower end. It doesn't show the Purina mill. It doesn't show some of the other elevators deeper in, and we'll talk about those a little bit. You may notice up in the upper area where you see Gilmore's, Later Brothers Scrap, that's where they were pulling the gondola from. It's a typical scrap yard. They scrap a little bit of everything. You might find a washing machine, cars. They don't do rail cars that I know of, but it's a pretty interesting scrap. But we're not going to spend a lot of time on the scrap yard. We know what those look like. So we're going to take a look right now at the extension side of it and some of the buildings that are over there. Cargill and Minneapolis Seed, this at one time was a Cargill elevator. It's gone through some various different ownership. Originally, it was a seed company. I suspect they produced seed for corn farmers. I suspect they produced seed for wheat and barley and a lot of the things that are grown in the upper Midwest. The sign says Minneapolis Seed Company. I've seen it referred to as Minnesota Seed, but it's a kind of an interesting looking building. And once again, it has grain service. It has that nice little gray garage door down there that's going to take cars. I have never seen them pull a car through there. So apparently they're not using this for grain much anymore. But it's a pretty unique building. I like the square elevator and the kind of unique head house up on top, and then the larger warehouse. So if we look kind of back on the track there, we can kind of see where the commercial uses areas to put cars that are off spot in the store. Anytime we're doing operations, we're looking for places that we can stash cars, because a lot of times we'll bring more cars to an industry than we have room for. So there's always off spot. And every time that I would go along Hoffman Avenue, I'd come over here. And in the early days, I saw an awful lot of older 3-bay covered hoppers and a lot of air slides, because air slides were the coin of the realm when we were shipping flour. So there's all kinds of interesting air slides in there. Excuse me. And I would take a lot of pictures of those air slides. We won't share them here today, but I've probably got 50 to 100 air slide pictures here and there of different cars that were in this particular area. This picture comes from a day, it was a gray day. I was in Minneapolis doing something. It was spring, the snow is melting all over the place. It's muddier than all get out. And I decided to go wade around in a railroad yard, essentially, to take pictures. But I do that all the time, so it's not uncommon for me to come home covered in mud and have my car look like it's been basically dipped in a dirt. But again, now we're going to kind of go into that milling district. And the first mill that we're going to take a look at is the ADM Nokomis mill, or Nokomis mill as it's often referred to. This one's interesting to me because they not only service the front of this mill, they service the back of it as well. So they're putting cars in there. The video that you shot showed them putting cars on what essentially is what they call the backtrack back here. And that was pneumatic unloading. They actually had the hoses that they would hit some of those pneumatic cars. So I suspect they were getting flour to add to make blends or to load from this particular area. Although I never saw them actually load on this side. They tended to load on the other side. So this is the Nokomis mill. Again, it's a typical flour mill, very boxy in construction, generally between 4 and 6 floors. That's because the milling process means that as they mill down, they will take one side of the mill is for cleaning the grain, getting all the impurities out of it, getting it hulled, so they get just the germ and the parts they want to mill into flour. And then they air it back up to the top, and then it goes through a procedure called roller milling. And the roller mill basically refines it and brings it into much smaller and finer, down to the point where it's actually powder. And I've included a picture from fairly current of the Minnesota commercial servicing this mill. In this case, they only had one air slide at this particular time. The number of cars that are in here isn't as great as it was in some of the times when I went, when it was the sewer, the CP working it, and definitely not the same kind of capacity that the Milwaukee, I'm sure, was doing at that time. Well, Barry gives you really, really, really nice maps to show what they're doing at this particular place. You'll notice that there's a main line that goes through here. That would have been the old Milwaukee main, but then they have areas where they unload and load. You'll also notice that there's a wash rack. After they unload cars, they will generally clean them out and do things that will allow them to get. So if they're dumping grain, they're probably going to clean the car out, and they may reuse it to haul some sort of product. It might be hulls as the byproduct of milling. It might be dust. It may be any number of things, but they're going to use it so they can keep the impurities down. They may get a really nice car, and they may reload it in the flour pool. Up front, it says the truck pool. Again, that's that pneumatic area where they were loading and unloading trucks. And they always had room for off spots there. The hill track was kind of where they would store, and actually in that case, that was right across the road. I believe it's 31st Street, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go back and look at the maps. And this is just the back side of that structure. That big white building is that unloading building that you saw spots from. Again, you see that in the modern day, they have a fall retention system so they can get up on the cars, not fall into the cars and get swallowed by the grain or fall off of the cars and break something. And then they have the elevator storage, the tubes or the rounded bins that allow them to store grain so they can get it as they need it to use. And here's that structure a little bit. Again, that little area, that's the dump. In this case, they probably, because of the size of the building, it probably wasn't a full car dump. They may have only had one hopper or two hoppers. When I was down there looking around, some of the older elevators had cable car pullers where they literally attach a cable to the hooks on the eyelets on the bottom, and they just drag the car through as they needed it. Literally right across the tracks is a place called Elevator T. Elevator T is basically used by a malting, or was at that time used by a malting company for storage of the various components of malt. And so a lot of different size bins, different components. There's a literal ton of gingerbread on top of this thing for dust collection and the things that they do to keep the explosion hazard down. Literally, this set of trackage butts right up on a residential neighborhood. It probably keeps some of their people happy that they don't have to wash their cars every day. I do know that they ship dust out of here as a byproduct. I've seen the track, and you'll see that in the piece in the morning. Again, you'll see a commercial locomotive in the lower picture. You'll also see their engine shed. We're going to talk about their engines in a bit. Elevator T. And the one cool part about this is not only do I have the map, but I have the instructions of how that it's supposed to be switched. Elevator T both receives and ships grain. Empty cars are usually left south of the shed, and on the circle track up to the north crossing must be left clear of both crossovers so they can get at them. Elevator T uses their own locomotives to move cars. Commercial crews, MNR crews, are not to use the elevator tracks other than to spot or pull cuts of cars. So if I'm operating and I'm building this to operate, I'm saying you put the cars in the off spots and you walk away. That's all you're going to do, no spotting, because they have their own ability to spot the cars, their own locomotives. Here's looking southward, if you will, and this is an older picture. A gentleman named Colin Hart, he's Dutch, and I don't pronounce Dutch well, has a Facebook site called Hiawatha Avenue, and he was doing some digging, and he found these in the Library of Congress. And it's part of a package of grain mills and elevators from the Twin Cities. And one of the reasons I love this shot, number one, it's older. I model modern, but I like to see, and I model with a whole bunch of guys that are steam era and transition era. I love to see those older box cars, particularly the Northwestern and the Milwaukee cars, but I like to see the grain doors. How did they do this? How did they make this work? There's a perfect chance to see what grain doors look like and a place they might be coopered. And further to the south, we'll talk about the elevators down there as well. This is kind of what it looks like today. Some of the structure has been dropped. I'm told that this is one of the elevators that is currently under consideration to be demolished. All of this stuff is in peril because, as I said, it's very close to the light rail, which you saw moving in the YouTube video. This will be very popular for housing. It's also very close to some of the territory where they had some of the unrest. So obviously they're going to want to rebuild and get this area built back up. And they had their own engines. I went out online just to kind of see, and fortunately there's a lot of great pictures of the critters that work what is basically Schroeder malt. And this is a GE 35 ton, I'm told. Again, it's hauling what looks like a blue cylindrical hopper. Don't know exactly if that's one of the Alberta Heritage cars or if it's one of the Pillsbury cars. The Sioux Line got a whole bunch of Pillsbury cars, so it's entirely possible it's a remarked Pillsbury. I don't have enough of a picture of it to see, and I can't read the reporting marks. I don't know what that might look like. But this engine was pretty light, so they worked to acquire another engine, just as interesting, an SW1. And I understand when I first saw this engine, I said, oh, that looks Milwaukee-ish. Unfortunately, it's not one of the Milwaukee Donkeys. It is a former Conrail engine. And I actually went back and searched the number out, and it goes back into Conrail and into the PC era. So I don't know much about it more than that, but if you're interested, this engine actually is very searchable on locomotive databases. So they had their own locomotives. They did their own spotting and probably their own pulling through the mill, because obviously the railroads weren't there all the time. They had to be able to move cars. Now the Nokomis mill that we saw first, that has since been closed. Again, They're looking at the property potentially as a property for building high-rise or condominiums of sorts, probably 5, 6 stories, because it's very close to downtown. It would be a very easy commute on the light rail. You get there very quickly, very manageable. But ADM is still using the Atkinson mill. The Atkinson mill was an original mill. So was Nokomis, but the Atkinson didn't come to ADM right away. Atkinson actually didn't go to ADM until 1962. And the Atkinson family owned this mill and used this mill to mill their own product for a long time. You can find pictures of Atkinson trucks in the loading facilities. So it's a pretty interesting mill. Currently, this mill produces over 1 million pounds of flour a day, enough to fill 20 bulk trailer trucks or 10 rail cars. So you see, they're churning out a lot of product, which means they're generating in a lot of product. They have to have rail cars all the time. The lower picture shows you the other end of this building, the other side of this building, on the left-hand side. A few more facts about that. This mill was originally opened in 1915, but if you look at it really closely, this thing's been added onto a bunch. And every time they add on to it, it just gains a little bit more character. ADM, incidentally, a lot of people think of that as an Illinois company. Actually, ADM was originally developed in Minneapolis. They made linseed oil. And then as they bought into the grain world a little bit, things moved along pretty significantly. There's a pretty nice Star Tribune article on this mill if you want to know a little bit more. Again, this one has all kinds of spots. They actually have spots within the building. On the other side, you kind of saw a little bit about that shed and where the pit is for dumping the grain into, and then the spots on the inside for loading. Again, you have a wash for clean out. You have another set of places, track 1, where you can actually put cars that are waiting to be washed or waiting to be reused, probably some off spots. Again, these maps are really interesting to me, and I want to spend a little bit more time with Barry or someone who knows and figure out exactly how this mill gets switched, or how it got switched and how it gets switched now. I'm lucky. One of the guys in my operating group here in La Crosse, the River Rail group, a gentleman named Steve Brudlos, has an absolutely gorgeous Milwaukee Road Railroad. He worked for the Milwaukee, the Sioux, and the CP for a number of years, ended up being one of the train masters up here, did a lot of work with this line and knows a lot about it. And when I showed him these pictures when we did our Thursday night sessions, he had lots of stories. And if I can ever get him sat down in front of a microphone, we're going to do a little bit of verbal history, because I think he's got a lot of things that modelers would be very interested in. And here's just a look at the backside. This one's got a cornucopia of grain cars coming in this case, a lot of Burlington Northern, BNSF. So these are newer cars. You can see down in the clean out areas, we have some air slides that are getting ready to haul, because we don't know what was in that air slide before. We want to make sure that it's clean and ready to go. So when we push it inside the building, you can kind of see that building. So those kind of square structures back along the larger rectangular concrete building, that when they load it, they can load undercover. Again, this is all food grade product. They want to keep it as clean as possible. And you kind of look, and this is another view showing us another elevator that's in there that we're going to talk about in just a second. Little bit older view again. Look at the nice 40-foot outside braced boxcars that are in there. Pretty interesting stuff. Lots of trackage in there. Again, another shot, this time looking from the other side of the tracks back towards elevator T, the Atkinson mill on the left side. And then the next elevator we're going to talk about, another shot. This one's a little bit later, and I have to say one thing for the commercial. They put some money into this line, and the Sioux line put some money into this line. On the day I was photographing it, there was a Sioux line flat car with ties and rail on it. and they were trying to help it out a little bit. They were doing some maintenance in there, replacing ties, trying to get the track a little bit nicer than it was. So I'm going to show you a video at the end of this talk that's going to show you how scary it got in the Milwaukee days. And Mr. Brudlos tells me that it wasn't uncommon for him to get called down there for a derailment at least once a day of some sort. And probably it was just the engine going off or a car going off, and they just threw some lumber down and ramped it back up to the track and went about their business. The next elevator we're going to talk about has been affectionately known occasionally as Checkerboard, also known as the Cyril's elevator. Currently, I believe it's under contract for General Mills. I believe they store grain there. It is a little bit different in elevator terms. It's not quite as gingerbready, or a lot of the structure isn't as visible as it is on an elevator T. It has a really interesting Art Deco head house. And this is the second one of these I've seen in the Twin Cities. Very similar to this. This kind of Art Deco looked head house, very square, taller, generally 2 times as tall as the elevator. There's a bungee elevator up on the BNSF line up in the north side of Minneapolis that has a very similar kind of structure. And so as I was looking at this, I was saying, those are awfully unique. And so I'm going to try and get 2 pictures together and kind of compare them. Lots of stuff on this elevator, windows, garage doors, all kinds of different kinds of things in that head house, and a really interesting loading structure, which we'll get a little bit better look at. Again, this is just a little bit deeper into the backside, looking back at elevator T. Some more of those older boxcars. There's some really great stuff in that Library of Congress piece. If you're looking for older grain pictures, they're out there, but you're going to have to dig through a lot of modern day stuff to get at them. But I have found an amazing amount of steam era and transition era pictures, particularly in places like the Library of Congress, the Minnesota Historical Society, actually the Minneapolis Development Commission, because before they do any major development in these areas and they're going to tear something down, it's probably going to end up on the National Register or be considered. So they do a lot of photography. And so I've been able to acquire a lot of pictures from public domain sources. Makes for an interesting array. I love this loading structure and this really interesting set of gravity tubes that they use to load these cars both inside and outside. I've never seen one stick out quite that far. They've got both inner loading and outer loading. Probably the inner loading is for dumping as well, because they did get grain and in and out. Obviously, you got to get it in there to store it and bring it back out. So it's kind of an interesting elevator. This one is still in place. And this is gone. This is the Purina feed mill. Again, this was property that was very highly valued. They basically made animal feed in this area, and they did a lot of it. And this is a really nice night shot. I forget exactly whose this is. I'm sorry if I don't give you credit. But it was an interesting structure. They got a lot of interesting cars in and out. Again, because it's animal feed, we don't have to think necessarily about air slides, because we don't have to be quite so antiseptic about things. So again, this is going to get more ordinary covered hoppers. A little bit further down, this elevator is still there, or at least it was the last time I was in the cities, and it's been a year since I've been up there. This is elevator M. It was a Harvest States facility. This one's unique because it's one of the elevators that I've seen in a number of places that got painted with a mural, and the mural is fading a little bit. But again, it's kind of an interesting structure. Obviously, Emporis is a real estate management holding group. They have a lot of pictures online. I believe they also sell stock photography. If I violated their copyright, I apologize, knowing I don't make a dime off of this. Okay, we're going to show you another video. William Sampson is a great modeler in the Twin Cities. He's done an awful lot of work for keeping his modeling groups and the Twin Cities guys together and meeting. He's also been very online with the Twin Cities division and showing a lot of work that the railroads, they've had great railroad tours. I strongly recommend you go take a look at some of the things that the NMRA Twin Cities division has put out there. He puts out I'd say weekly, but I don't think it's weekly. It's fairly regular video that he calls Sue the Milwaukee Road, which is diagramming the little bits of the bit of railroad that he's building. In fact, a very, very, very nice version of Hiawatha Avenue. And because I'd love to show you my Hiawatha Avenue, but right now it's bench work with nothing on it. It's not very exciting yet. I figured I'd do a little bit of creative borrowing. So I'm going to have to start this and then kind of jump it to a place so we get into the meat and potatoes. And then at the end of this, there's some amazing, amazing video from Bob Rivard. Bob Rivard is a noted railroad photographer, videographer. He has a gorgeous Sioux Line Railroad in the Twin Cities. He shot a lot of stuff that you just can't get anymore. And he has some pictures of an MP15 working down in here. And you'll be kind of amazed at some of the quality of stuff that's there. So it's going to take me a little bit to get this started. I'm hoping you can get the sound. I'm hoping the sound is okay. If it isn't, we'll just have to kind of explain it along the way.
In this episode, we attempt to explain where the railroad is actually at.
So we'll start right about
the
there.
Walters were going to be too short. So as we continue swinging south here, we are looking at now what would be Hiawatha Lumber. And this one here is going to actually be referred to as Friesman Manufacturing. And that's just a tribute to Gary Friesman, who got us into operations. So somebody that I think the actual name of it was like Pressman or something along those lines, but I'm going to call it Friesman Manufacturing. This location, so this block, would normally actually be down a little bit further. And then the elevators that are there would have normally been here. But due to selective compression and where things were located, I wanted to maximize this corner space. This building is not going to be here. This is just a temporary structure, but it's going to show you that a lumber yard can kind of work in here, which will fit better than the utilization if I had built the elevators like General Mills or one of the elevators that would have been in this place. So as we move ourselves a little bit further south here, give you an idea of the line drawing. This is what I did to be able to give myself an idea of what we're looking at on the railroad itself. And Minneapolis Seed Company, where we started, we've worked our way south. We've taken a look at what I'm referring to as Cargill Elevator, but that's actually Elevator T. And then across the way here, this will be LS Donaldson. So as we looked at Friesman Manufacturing, Hiawatha Lumber, those two would actually kind of get flip-flopped. But then now we're down to 38th Street, and we're looking south, and this would be General Mills, or what was known as Searless Grain Company. And then on the belly track, which is the nearest track to us, is the Atkinson Milling Company, which is still in service today. So as we're looking across here, this crossover that we're looking at here, normally this switch would have swung back and gone towards the elevator T. So that's just to represent it. I want this look to look like it did, actually does. They've removed this crossover, but it kind of gives you the idea of what we're going to be going for. This will be Atkinson. We'll feed Atkinson here, and then this is going to be General Mills. So that brings us to the end of the line and the end of the look at the railroad itself. Hopefully you've got a better idea of kind of what's going on. I am going to dive into how I'm laying the track, how I've built the bench work, and everything that's kind of moving along. So hopefully you enjoyed this particular segment, and we'll dive into more of this at a little bit later date. Today, we're rail family with Robert Brevard. Some of us just know him as Bob.
Hey, Bob.
I got to give Bobby huge thanks for this particular footage because this is circa 1986 in my era, Milwaukee Road in the Hiawatha Elevated District. It doesn't get any better than that. Little thing to learn about this particular job, it was also known as the Garden Job. This is an MP15 AC, former Milwaukee Road, now Sioux Line. The Sioux Line never owned any MP15 ACs until they acquired the Milwaukee Road. But if you wanted to buy one of these in 1975, you'd only have to shell out $326,198.50.
keep the change, you filthy animal.
Hey, not bad. I think I'll get two.
The Milwaukee Road actually ordered 2 sets of these, 2 sets of 32. There's 32 ordered in 1975 and then 32 ordered in 1976. Let's give a listen if we can hear the crew yelling to Bob. Now, as they roll out, we'll roll out too, but not before showing you a few highlights of what's to come. And that won't be the last of the rail fanning we do with Mr. Bob Rivard. We're going to be able to check out a little bit more of the Hiawatha Elevator District, as well as some of the vehicles that happen to be passing through the area.
Ooh, sweet ride.
The Shag and Wagon.
And also an opportunity to listen to that sweet eval. You can look forward to vintage footage like this in future episodes of Sue the Milwaukee Road.
All right, here's the curmudgeon coming at you for the crap of the week. This week it's timeliness. We're talking about being on time for operating sessions or any events that somebody invites you to and says, hey, you should show up at 11 o'clock. And if you show up at 10 o'clock, that's a little bit too early. I'm telling you right now, nobody needs to see their friends sitting in their skivvies because they ain't ready for you to show up yet. That's what we're talking about right now, though, is being on time. And if you're going to be late, don't even show up. Don't even take the invite. I'm telling you right now, just pay attention and be on time. Because if you're not on time, you're late. And that's the curmudgeon's crap of the week. Nobody needs to see their friends sitting in their skivvies.
A big thanks to everybody that watches to the end, that has hit like, hit subscribe, as well as made comments in the past. It's those actions that help share this content. So if you haven't checked out other episodes, feel free to do so. You can also check out the tour of the GN in 1970, as well as past episodes of the GN in 1970.
70s.
Nobody needs to see their friends sitting in their skivvies.
In this episode, we attempt to explain where.
So that's about all that I have for tonight. We'll get some questions. I know, I don't know if there are any questions, but we'll answer what we can. And if I can't figure it out, we'll come up with some answers for you.
Well, you guys definitely have a sense of humor up there.
I really appreciate William Sampson's work. It's a lot of fun. He always spikes it with a lot of really interesting humor and some things to think about.
Where's my questions file? So the grain elevators that you showed in the rail line there, how many trains are still running down there today?
Well, I know the commercial still works it. I believe they work it every day. I don't know if it's as heavy as it was back in the Milwaukee days where they would actually work it 2 times, and I've heard occasionally 3 times if they're really producing hard or they've got a lot of cars. But for the most part, it was twice a day. I believe the commercial did do some of those twice a day jobs. But I think now, because of the mills closing, some of the elevators not as busy or closing, I think it's probably down to one job a day, at least at this point.
And do you model any of these elevators on your railroad?
Yes, I'm actually in the process right now of building elevator T because it's the easiest one of the batch. But I've also explored the Nokomis mill and the Atkinson mill. The Nokomis mill is very, very similar to the Walthers flour mill, the Red Wing flour mill. It's a little bit different in the fact that it is tan brick. I think there's a way I can get around that, and the way I'm going to do it, at least the way I'm going to try it, is I'm going to try using decal film that's printed on an inkjet printer over the gray to get just enough of the cement gray in there and just enough of the brick texture. One good thing, if you go out there and look, there's all kinds of textures available out there online. You have to scale it down to HO, which means you have to be reasonably good with a photo reduction program. But slowly but surely, that's kind of how I'm going to do that. Atkinson's a little bit different because it has brick structure, it has concrete structure. That's going to be pretty much a styrene hack. The elevators, PVC sewer pipe. Any Menards, Home Depot, and actually, I'm going to plug William Sampson again, has a great technique for slicing pipe. One of the best I've ever seen, because it's a very interesting thing when you're trying to slice pipe in half. And I always worry about my thumbs because I'm pushing it and I have a push stick, but he has a really, really nice technique and it works very, very, very well. So again, in that structure, I've looked at the Purina mill. I'd like to put it in there. There is so much in there. That's going to be a monumental project, but I think it's doable. So slowly but surely, yeah, I'm getting them put together. Right now, the emphasis is on the railroad. I built this railroad back when I was living in Iowa in a much smaller space. I couldn't have Hiawatha Avenue, so I didn't have any of the structures built.
So you mentioned you're modeling the modern MN.
Yeah.
Is it today or early?
It would be today. I go back to probably 2014, 2015. The BN side of it, I look for the height of the crude oil rush out of North Dakota, because it was at the time the railroads were about as busy as they were. They were almost on the verge of a meltdown, and the fact that it was hard to get traffic across. They had the taconite traffic out of the ports up in Duluth. The BN runs a taconite all rail taconite train from Superior and Keewatin, Minnesota, down to Granite City, the mill down there. One of the things I miss about the not having the St. Louis convention is I was hoping to see if we could get a tour to that mill, because I wanted to see what they do with it. And I know they make, one of the products they make down there is coil steel. And so it was always interesting to me to do that. Plus all the grain traffic, all the intermodal traffic was at a high. The railroads were just as busy as they were possibly could be. So it made it very, very interesting to model in that era. So that's kind of why I'm doing. Plus, I'm a motive power guy. It's not uncommon for me to have a couple of CSX engines and some Norfolk Southern engines and some CN engines. The nice thing about today's consist, I live right on the BNSF, and I can tell you today I've seen Canadian Pacific, CSX, NS, and KCS power in addition to the BNSF power. So there's all kinds of ability to do that. That's why I model in the modern era. Could I be persuaded to go back? The Milwaukee area is really cool. I'm going to keep the MP15s because I really like MP15s. I think they're very, very cool locomotives. But the commercial is really neat because it's got the older Alco power from the Green Bay and Western, some of the older Canadian MLW locomotives. So there's a lot of really cool stuff. That's one of the things that attracted me to the Twin Cities. Originally, I started out modeling the BN River line. Great stretch of railroad, no switching. It's basically a big super highway of traffic. There's a few industries there, but they're concentrated, and it would be not the easiest thing in the world to model. I was thumbing through a great model railroads that I had just gotten to look at Jeff Wilson's article on modeling the river line in the Great Western and IC eras and the CB&Q. The next page over is Jim Sinizi's Kansas City Terminal. I read that article and I said, Twin Cities, major class ones, really interesting short lines. Oh yeah, one of those short lines runs Alcos. It's easy to do.
So someone says you basically model what you grew up with. Do you go outside your comfort zone?
Oh yeah. I grew up in the IC era in Iowa. Seeing meat trains, seeing grain trains, first with box cars, 40-foot box cars, and then into the covered hopper era. You saw my covered hopper clinic. I showed you my Athearn Cargill covered hopper. The cool thing about living in a place that has a great operating group, I don't have to build something and then figure out what I'm going to do with it.
Correct.
Because I've got guys in the transition era. If I want to build a box car that has grain doors, guess what? I got one. I'm actually relettering this for somebody, but I can do those kinds of things. Steve Brudlos models the steam into diesel era, a little bit older stuff. I don't produce anything for his railroad because he's already got many, many, many more beautiful things than I could produce, but pretty much everybody around here contributes. the cool part of it, the River Rail Group, and I'm going to plug us, River Rail, all one word, 2 R's in the middle, .com. It's a great group of guys that operate. We have an invitational every other year where we bring in people from all over the country to come operate. It's a pretty rare Saturday that we're not operating a railroad, and then a couple of times a week we're working on somebody's somewhere. So I'll plug operating groups. That's what got me interested in doing the research. Kind of helped me move up in this direction. The right job, it made it definitely possible, but I love this operating group. They're great, and we have a lot of fun. And I'm close to the Twin Cities, and there's a lot of great railroads and railroad resources up there as well.
Definitely. There's a bunch more questions. Do you know why the mills are closing?
Well, I can tell you why the ADM mills are closing. ADM has built an enormous flour mill down in Illinois that will handle much more capacity. And strangely enough, it's easy to get flour where it needs to go and to a lot of the end users by truck. It's not as easy to get it there by railroad. Well, the railroad can haul raw materials in anywhere. It's a little bit further, but they can get it down into Illinois and it's already being served. So they're building bigger mills. As the mills get older, they're harder to maintain. Obviously, they may not have the capacity necessary to produce the amount of flour that's necessary. I can't even imagine how much 1 million pounds of flour is, but I'll wager a guess a pretty good bakery can go through that fairly fast. Now let's multiply that by 10 bakeries that want your product, and they need to produce even more. The other thing is real estate values along that corridor are amazing. So that's why some of the flour mills, at least in the ADM world, are closing.
So are there different types of grain?
Well, they make flour out of a lot of things. The predominant product is wheat. But if you eat cereal, if you've ever had Cheerios or Lucky Charms in the morning, the cereal part, not the cute little marshmallows, is made out of oats, another Twin Cities product. The mill for that is over on the north side of Minneapolis in Fridley, but it used to be that Fridley plant was a cleaning and initial processing, and then they loaded them back into rail cars and drug them down to Purity Oats, where they'd get milled even further. And then they'd go off to the cereal production places, one of those being Cedar Rapids, Iowa, to make Cheerios. So there's a lot of rail movement involved. So other mills may mill rye flour because we need pumpernickel and other things. It just depends. There are different flours. If you go into any good grocery store, you'll find flours made of a variety of product. If you go into a health food store or a co-op, they make flour out of soy. They make it out of a variety of things. They make blends, and a lot of companies will blend flours. So there's lots of stuff.
So when product shows up at one of these mills, it's all the same kind. It's not like they store different types of material.
Well, I did a little bit of research. Somebody asked that question earlier, and I did a little bit of research. For the predominant part, for a mill to change requires an immense amount of cleaning and repurposing, because a roller mill that's milling wheat may have to have mill wheels changed. It may have to have structure changed. It's obviously going to have to be cleaned out, because if you say this is pure oat flour, if you find wheat in it and somebody has a wheat allergy,
Yes,
things get a little messy. The other thing is our diets are changing a little bit, and gluten-free is bigger. So I suspect we're not eating quite as many baked goods. That's not a problem for me. If you know me, I've got my nice little belly here. But again, the industry is changing, and I haven't been able to track all of the things in the industry that are changing. I read agribusiness news occasionally. I'm not in the agricultural business. I work in education. I'm an educational technical specialist. So I understand a lot of it, but sometimes I read something and I go, I don't know what they just said. And sometimes I have to do some research. And the more I talk to good people who have information from the inside, if I can talk to a flour miller, somebody who's worked at one of these mills, I get better information. And that's why I say never be afraid to tear something out, because you find out something better. or redesign something. I'm lucky right now. I'm in the process of its benchwork stage, and I've got wonderful drawings of some of these territories. But as I put it together, I say, well, I can't put as many. William Sampson again couldn't put all the tracks in that he probably wanted to, wishes he had more space, but did a phenomenal job with what he had, and can definitely get the look and the feel of that particular railroad. So that's kind of why. So as far as most of the mills that I know of do wheat or oats. There is barley flour. I don't know exactly what it's used for, but again, some of the specialty mills may change up more than some of these purpose-built mills that are specifically for wheat.
So there's a big question here. When are we going to see a layout tour?
Well, I'm hoping, God forbid, to have some track down and some things that I can show you in about. I'm hoping to have some track down almost immediately. When I build railroad, I build sections of bench work, and I always try to get some track on it, because one of the biggest killers is, I got to go down and build bench work again, and you never see a train move.
Yes.
So I tend to put the main lines down as I can get them down, and at least feed them with something. The first time I ran the railroad in Waterloo, I had 4 feeders in a 24-foot room that went in and out in a dog boat, around the walls with peninsulas. And we ran that for an open house. And yeah, you got to the end of the power districts and things would slow down a little bit, but it got us excited to build a little bit more. And then all of a sudden industry trackage goes in, the yard that you need to build is in, much smaller railroad. This one's a little bit bigger. The cool thing about River Rail is all I have to do is say, we're building, guys, and I'll have as many people in as I can handle. As long as you feed them, make sure that the refrigerator is well stocked with alcoholic grain products. They'll be here to help build. That's one of the great things of a good-sized operating group. Plus, they're always full of ideas.
Of course. Last question about about elevator T. Do you know when he got the SW1?
Oh boy, no, but I'll research that.
Oh,
I'm going to give you my email address. If you have questions or you have information you can help me with, please. If I said something wrong, please let me know. My email address is David, DAVIDL, Burman, BURMAN, @gmail.com. That's David L. Burman, one word. Don't leave the L out. I'm sure there's somebody that's horrendously irritated to be getting railroad email that isn't me. And I like to answer. I try to answer within a day. I'm currently working solid 8-hour, sometimes 10-hour days, trying to make sure that we can get college courses out to our students. So I don't always get a chance to respond during the day, but usually by the nighttime I've got a chance to put stuff out.
Thank you, Dave, for another awesome clinic.
Well, thank you. It's fun to do this, and I do all this research to get track planning down a little bit tighter, to get some of the prototype stuff down tighter. I wish I had more to show you build-wise. That's coming up. I've got some smaller grain elevators, and I'm going to show at a clinic fairly soon. Some things that I've been working on just because they're fun.
Thank you.